Emma stood at the kitchen counter, her trembling hands gripping the edge as another wave of exhaustion washed over her. 8 months pregnant, and she'd just finished her 12-hour shift at the diner. The baby kicked inside her, a reminder of the life growing within despite her fatigue. Through the doorway, she could see Marcus sprawled on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through his phone. He hadn't looked up once since she'd walked through the door 40 minutes ago. The dirty dishes from his lunch still sat on the coffee table, crusted over and waiting for her attention. She watched him laugh at something on his screen, completely oblivious to her presence, to her pain, to the weight she carried, both literally and figuratively. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the quiet dread of knowing she had to be up in 5 hours for her morning shift at the grocery store. 2 jobs, 1 baby on the way, and a husband who couldn't be bothered to ask how her day went. The stillness between them wasn't peaceful. It was charged with unspoken resentment. Emma's doctor had warned her about working so hard in her condition, but Marcus had just shrugged when she mentioned it. Bills don't pay themselves, he'd said, eyes never leaving the television. She'd once mistaken his indifference for strength. Now she recognized it for what it was: selfishness. As she prepared a simple sandwich for dinner, she wondered when exactly their love had disappeared, or if it had ever truly been there at all. The alarm blared at 5 a.m., jarring Emma from what little sleep she'd managed to get. Morning sickness hit immediately. She barely made it to the bathroom, retching painfully while Marcus groaned from the bed, complaining about the noise. By 5:30, she was forcing down dry toast, the only thing that seemed to stay in her stomach these days. Her grocery store uniform strained against her swollen belly as she buttoned it with shaking fingers. The morning shift started at 6 a.m. sharp, and her supervisor had already warned her twice about being late. Emma caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror, dark circles under her eyes, complexion sallow, hair hastily pulled back. She hardly recognized herself anymore. As she grabbed her purse, Marcus rolled over in bed, pulling the covers higher. "Can you make less noise?" he mumbled. Emma didn't bother to respond. What was there to say? That she was sorry for disrupting his sleep while she worked to support their family? That she was sorry for being pregnant and sick and tired? The front door clicked shut behind her as she stepped into the pre-dawn darkness, the cold air biting at her face. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and her swollen ankles protested with each step. She thought about the mothers she'd seen on television shows. Glowing, pampered, with attentive husbands massaging their feet and bringing them breakfast in bed. Her reality couldn't be further from that fantasy. Emma's feet throbbed as she clocked out from the grocery store at 2 p.m. She had exactly 3 hours before her waitressing shift started at the diner across town. Just enough time to go home, shower, change, and catch the bus to her second job. She unlocked the door to find Marcus playing video games, empty beer cans surrounding him like a miniature fortress. The kitchen was a disaster. He'd clearly made himself lunch and left everything exactly where he'd used it. "Hey," he said without looking up. "Can you grab me another beer?" Emma stared at him, incredulous. Her back felt like it might snap in half. The baby had been kicking all day, pressing painfully against her bladder. She hadn't had a proper meal since breakfast, just a quick apple and some crackers during her 10-minute break. "Marcus, I need to shower and leave again soon," she said, her voice tight. He finally glanced at her, annoyance flashing across his face. "It would take you 2 seconds to grab a beer." Emma felt something inside her shift. Not the baby, but something deeper, something foundational. Still, she opened the refrigerator, grabbed him a beer, and set it on the coffee table before heading to the bathroom. The shower water couldn't wash away the growing resentment, the dawning realization that she was essentially alone in this pregnancy, in this marriage, in this life. By 5:30, she was tying her apron around her prominent belly at the diner, ready for another 6 hours on her feet. "God, you're moving like a turtle today," Marcus complained as Emma slowly made her way across the living room, balancing a plate of food in one hand while the other supported her lower back. At 8.5 months pregnant, every movement had become a deliberate negotiation with her changing body. She set his dinner in front of him without a word. "What, no salt?" he asked, looking at the plate with disdain. Emma turned away, too tired to respond, but he wasn't finished. "I'm just saying you used to put more effort into things. Pregnancy's not a disability, you know?" The casual cruelty of his words hung in the air between them. From the couch, he took a long sip of his beer, his fourth of the evening, while she drank water and tried to ignore the heartburn climbing up her throat. Earlier that day, a concerned customer at the diner had asked if she should really be working in her condition. The woman's kindness had nearly broken Emma's carefully constructed emotional dam. Now, watching Marcus criticize her while contributing nothing, that dam threatened to burst again. "Maybe if you helped once in a while, I wouldn't be so tired," she ventured quietly. He snorted in response. "I work too, you know. Not my fault you can't handle things anymore." The truth was, Marcus's part-time job barely covered his personal expenses. The rent, utilities, groceries, and baby preparations all came from Emma's 2 jobs. But he spoke as if he were the primary provider, the one making all the sacrifices. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store swam before Emma's eyes. She gripped the edge of the checkout counter, feeling suddenly lightheaded and distant as if she were floating above her own body. "Ma'am? Are you okay?" The customer's voice seemed to come from miles away. Emma tried to respond, but the words wouldn't form. The scanner slipped from her hand as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. She was vaguely aware of her knees buckling, of concerned voices calling her name, of someone shouting for help. When she regained consciousness, she was lying on the break room couch, a concerned manager hovering over her while a coworker held a cool cloth to her forehead. "The ambulance is on its way," someone said. Emma immediately tried to sit up. No ambulance, I can't afford it," she protested weakly. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her pocket, her diner manager wondering where she was for her evening shift. With trembling fingers, she called Marcus, hoping against hope that for once he would step up. "I fainted at work," she explained, her voice small. "They want to take me to the hospital. Could you come get me instead?" There was a long pause on the other end. "I'm in the middle of something with the guys," he finally said. "Can't you just take a cab home?" The coldness of his response felt worse than the physical collapse. Eventually, her coworker Jane drove her to the urgent care clinic, waited while she was examined, and then took her home. Marcus was out when she arrived. He didn't return until after midnight, stumbling slightly, smelling of beer and indifference. The doctor had been clear. Emma needed to reduce her workload immediately or risk serious complications. She sat across from Marcus at their small kitchen table, the medical papers spread between them like a gulf she no longer knew how to cross. "I have to cut back to 1 job," she explained, watching his face carefully. "The doctor says the baby's showing signs of distress." Marcus leaned back in his chair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "And how are we supposed to pay the bills?" he demanded. "My job barely covers the rent." Emma took a deep breath. "You could pick up more hours. Or look for something full-time." The suggestion hung in the air, reasonable yet somehow audacious. Marcus's jaw tightened. "So I'm supposed to work myself to death while you take it easy?" The casual cruelty of his words made something shift inside her. She noticed she hadn't called him babe in weeks. When had that stopped? When had honey disappeared from her vocabulary. When had his name become just a sound, stripped of all affection? "I'm carrying your child," she said quietly. "I've been working 2 jobs for months. I've pushed myself to the breaking point, and now I'm asking for your help." He stood up, chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need a drink," he muttered, grabbing his keys. The door slammed behind him, rattling the cheap frames on the wall. Pictures of happier times, of a couple she no longer recognized. Emma sat alone at the table, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider a future without Marcus, and was surprised to find it didn't frighten her as much as it once would have. Labor came 3 weeks early, fast and furious in the middle of her shift at the grocery store. Emma had managed to keep this one job, working reduced hours against Marcus's constant complaints about money. Her coworker Jane called for an ambulance while another rushed to phone Marcus. By the time Emma reached the hospital, her contractions were coming every 3 minutes. "Your husband's on his way," the nurse assured her as they wheeled her into the delivery room. But Marcus didn't come. Hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. Emma's mother arrived, having taken the first flight she could afford after Jane called her too. "Where is he?" her mother demanded, holding Emma's hand through another contraction. Emma just shook her head, tears mingling with sweat. At 3:17 a.m. after 18 hours of labor, Emma gave birth to a healthy boy, 7 pounds, 4 ounces of perfection, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's eyes. As she held her son for the first time, her phone buzzed with a text message. "Got tied up with stuff. Congrats, I guess. We'll stop by tomorrow." Her mother read the message over her shoulder and cursed softly. Emma simply turned off her phone and looked down at her son. "It's you and me, little one," she whispered, a strange calm settling over her. "We're going to be just fine." When Marcus finally showed up the next afternoon, reeking of stale alcohol and bearing a gas station teddy bear, something had fundamentally changed in Emma. She accepted the bear for her son but couldn't bring herself to thank Marcus. He barely looked at the baby, complaining instead about the hospital parking fees and asking when they could go home. Emma moved through their apartment like a ghost, silent and observant. 3 weeks had passed since she'd brought little Jaimes home, and in that time, a cold clarity had settled over her. Marcus sprawled on the couch, as usual, playing video games while she handled the baby's midnight feedings, diaper changes, and fussing, all while recovering from childbirth herself. Her mother had stayed as long as she could, but eventually had to return to her job across the country. Now it was just the 3 of them, though Marcus barely interacted with his son. "Can you get him to stop crying?" he snapped as Jaimes wailed from his bassinet. Emma picked up her son, soothing him automatically while studying her husband with new eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry anymore. She simply saw the selfishness that had always been there but that she'd mistaken for strength. Saw the laziness she'd excused as relaxation. Saw the indifference she'd desperately interpreted as stoicism. Most importantly, she saw the future stretching before her, years of carrying not just her child, but the dead weight of a man who would never, ever pull his share. "He's hungry," she said flatly, her voice devoid of the pleading tone that had once characterized her interactions with Marcus. She turned away without waiting for his response, knowing there wouldn't be one of substance anyway. That night, as Marcus slept soundly despite the baby's cries, Emma made a decision. She wouldn't leave, not yet. She didn't have the resources, but something else was leaving. Her heart, her hope, her willingness to pretend. The freeze had begun. 3 years passed like seasons changing. Gradually, then suddenly all at once. Emma had returned to work, finding a job with flexible hours at an insurance office while Jaimes attended a subsidized daycare program. She'd advanced quickly, her natural intelligence and work ethic recognized by managers who, unlike Marcus, actually paid attention to her contributions. At home, the dynamic had shifted in subtle ways that added up to a seismic change. Marcus had lost his part-time job 8 months after Jaimes' birth. Budget cuts? He claimed, though Emma suspected his chronic tardiness played a role. Since then, he'd bounced between temporary positions, none lasting more than a few months. Currently, he was between opportunities as he'd taken to saying, Emma paid the bills. Emma cooked the meals. Emma cared for Jaime. And Emma said less and less to the man who occupied space in their apartment like an increasingly unwelcome houseguest. When she'd first implemented her quiet distance, Marcus hadn't seemed to notice. By the time he did, it was too firmly established to question. You're acting weird, he'd ventured once when her silence had stretched for days. Am I? She'd responded, her voice neutral as she folded laundry, only hers and Jaime's, never his anymore. He'd waited for an explanation, but none came. Now, 3 years in, they existed in parallel lives. Emma rose and built a future for herself and her son. Marcus waited, seemingly expecting something to change without his effort, growing more bitter as his health began to deteriorate in small ways, a persistent cough, unexpected weight loss, a pallor to his skin that hadn't been there before. Still, he didn't seek help and Emma didn't suggest it. She simply watched, detached, as karma began its patient work. The coughing started as an occasional irritation barely noticeable against the backdrop of their silent coexistence. But over weeks, it deepened, became wet and persistent, waking Marcus in the night and leaving him breathless after climbing the single flight of stairs to their apartment. Emma observed the progression with clinical detachment, saying nothing even as she noticed the specks of blood on his tissue one morning. I think I need to see a doctor, he finally admitted over dinner, his voice rougher than it had once been. Emma continued eating, cutting Jaime's chicken into bite-sized pieces before responding. Probably a good idea. She didn't offer to make the appointment, didn't suggest clinics, didn't express concern. The wall between them, built brick by brick over years of his indifference, now stood complete and impenetrable. 2 days later, as Emma prepared to leave for work, Marcus appeared in the hallway, paler than usual. Could you? He hesitated, the request clearly difficult for him. Could you give me a ride to the urgent care today? I don't think I can manage the bus. Emma checked her watch. I have meetings all morning. There's a ride-share app on your phone. His face fell, a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension crossing his features. It's expensive, he protested weakly. Emma picked up her purse, unmoved. So is childcare, yet here we are. She closed the door behind her, ignoring the sound of his coughing fit echoing through the apartment. That evening, when she returned with Jaime, Marcus was sitting on the couch, a stack of medical papers beside him, his expression shell-shocked. It's pneumonia, he said. Maybe something worse. They want more tests. Emma nodded once, acknowledging the information without engaging with it emotionally. Jaime, go wash up for dinner, she said, turning toward the kitchen without another word to the sick man on her couch. Please, Emma. Just help me get to the doctor. Marcus's voice rasped from the bedroom doorway as Emma applied mascara, preparing for work. His pneumonia had evolved into something more serious. Some form of chronic respiratory condition that required regular monitoring and treatment. She met his eyes in the mirror, her gaze steady and unblinking. I thought I was too lazy for that, she replied, repeating his own words from years ago when she'd asked for his help during her pregnancy. The color drained from his already pale face as recognition dawned. That was different, he protested weakly. I was stressed about money. Emma capped her mascara, turning to face him directly. And I was 8 months pregnant, working 2 jobs to pay for your beer? The silence between them stretched, heavy with years of accumulated resentment and neglect. "I have a life-threatening condition," he finally said, his voice small. "The doctor says I need consistent care." Emma brushed past him, careful not to make physical contact. "The bus stop is 2 blocks away. You might want to leave early to make sure you don't miss it." In the kitchen, she packed Jaimes' lunch. A sandwich cut into the dinosaur shape he loved, carrot sticks, apple slices, a little note with a heart drawn on it. Such small gestures of love that Marcus had never bothered to show either of them. When she left for work, Jaimes' hand in hers, Marcus was still standing in the hallway, leaning against the wall for support, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Emma didn't look back. The woman who might have cared, who might have helped, who might have forgiven. That woman had died a slow death during her pregnancy and the early years of Jaimes' life. In her place stood someone stronger, colder, and unwilling to carry those who had let her fall. The power shift was subtle at first, then unmistakable. Emma's promotion at work came with a significant salary increase, allowing her to buy a used but reliable car and enroll Jaime in a better preschool program. Meanwhile, Marcus's condition continued to deteriorate, making even part-time work impossible. He'd applied for disability benefits but was caught in the slow machinery of bureaucracy and paperwork. Their refrigerator told the story of their new dynamic, healthy meals prepped for Emma and Jaime in neat containers, clearly labeled. Nothing specifically prepared for Marcus. He could eat what they ate if he managed to heat it up himself, or he could fend for himself with whatever basic groceries were available. One evening, as Emma and Jaime sat at the dinner table sharing stories about their day, Marcus emerged from the bedroom where he'd been resting. "Is there any dinner for me?" he asked, eyeing their plates of stir-fry. Emma didn't look up from helping Jaime with his fork. "There's bread and lunch meat in the fridge," she replied evenly. "You have hands." Marcus stood there a moment longer, swaying slightly from the effort of being upright. "I haven't eaten all day," he admitted. "I was too tired to make anything." Emma finally raised her eyes to his, her gaze unflinching. "I was too tired to make dinner many nights when I was pregnant and working 2 jobs. Somehow I managed." It wasn't cruelty driving her response. It was the simple mathematics of consequence. He had taught her that her exhaustion, her hunger, her needs didn't matter. She had merely learned the lesson well. As Marcus shuffled back to the bedroom, Emma returned her attention to Jaime, asking about the picture he'd drawn at school, her voice warm again in a way it never was with her husband. "I didn't know how hard it was back then," Marcus said from the watching as Emma efficiently moved through her evening routine, checking Jaime's homework, preparing lunches for the next day, sorting mail. His admission hung in the air between them, the closest thing to an apology he'd offered in their years together. Emma paused, a peanut butter sandwich half-assembled in her hands. Her smile was small, knowing, and entirely without warmth. "You did," she replied simply. "You just didn't care." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He started to protest, to create some narrative where he had been oblivious rather than indifferent. But the words died on his lips as she continued. "You watched me throw up every morning and still go to work. You saw me fall asleep at the dinner table from exhaustion. You heard the doctor say I was risking my health and our babies. You knew." Jaime appeared in the doorway, pajama-clad and sleepy-eyed, interrupting the moment. "Mom, can you read me a story?" Emma's face transformed, softening with genuine love. "Of course, sweetheart. Go pick one out." As she passed Marcus on her way to Jaime's room, he reached out, his fingers barely brushing her wrist. "Emma, please," he whispered. "I'm trying to apologize." She extracted her arm from his weak grasp without anger or hurry. "No, you're trying to escape the consequences of your choices." Her voice remained low, ensuring Jaime wouldn't hear. "There's a difference." In Jaime's room, she read 3 bedtime stories, each with different voices for the characters, patient and present despite her long day. From the living room, Marcus listened to the sound of his wife's animated storytelling, a warmth and energy she never directed his way anymore, and understood with crushing clarity exactly what he had thrown away. "Why doesn't Daddy ever play with me?" Jaimes asked one Saturday morning as Emma helped him build a fort out of couch cushions. At 5 years old, he was observant enough to notice the strange dynamics of their household. Emma took a deep breath, considering her response carefully. She'd vowed never to poison her son against his father, but she'd also promised herself never to lie to him. "Your daddy is sick, which makes him very tired," she began, securing a blanket over the cushions. But even before he got sick, he didn't know how to be a good daddy or a good husband. Jaimes' small face scrunched in thought. "Like how he never reads me stories or takes me to the park?" Emma nodded. "Everyone has to learn how to love other people properly, Jaimes. Some people never learn that lesson, or they learn it too late." She wasn't speaking with anger or bitterness, just matter-of-fact honesty appropriate for a child's understanding. "When I was carrying you in my tummy, I had to work 2 jobs because Daddy wouldn't help much. I got very sick and very tired, but I kept working because I loved you so much already." Jaimes crawled into the completed fort, pulling his favorite stuffed dinosaur with him. "Were you scared?" he asked. Emma joined him inside the cushion castle, their secret world where truth could be spoken safely. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but being your mom made me stronger than I ever knew I could be." She wasn't telling him this to create resentment, but to break the cycle. To show her son that love meant action, presence, and sacrifice. Later that day, when Marcus asked from his sickbed why they hadn't invited him to join their fort adventure, Jaimes simply said, "Mom says you're still learning how to play with others." The simple childhood wisdom hit harder than any adult recrimination could have. The couch had become Marcus's domain, his illness making the short walk to the bedroom too exhausting most days. Medical bills piled up on the coffee table despite the insurance Emma's job provided. The roles had completely reversed from those early days of their marriage. Now she was the sole provider, the decision-maker, the one who determined the rhythm of their household. Marcus spent his days watching television or scrolling through his phone, occasionally trying to engage Jaimes, who had learned, like his mother, to respond politely but without true connection. On this particular evening, Emma arrived home from work to find Marcus more alert than usual, a strange desperation in his eyes. "I called my parents today," he said as she hung up her coat. "They agreed to help with some of the medical expenses." Emma nodded, unsurprised. His wealthy parents had never approved of their marriage and had maintained a cool distance until now. "That's good," she replied, sorting through the mail. Marcus shifted on the couch, wincing with the effort. "They want me to move back home for treatment. They have connections to specialists." The unspoken question hung between them. Would she and Jaimes come too? Emma met his gaze steadily. "You should go," she said simply. "Jaimes and I will stay here. His school is here. My job is here." Marcus's face crumpled, the reality of what he was losing finally hitting him with full force. "Emma, please," he whispered. "We're still a family." She set the mail down, her movements deliberate and calm. "Are we? You checked out of this family before Jaimes was even born. I've been a single parent from the start." As she walked toward the kitchen to begin dinner, Marcus realized he was truly alone on the couch now, metaphorically and soon literally. The notepad shook in Marcus's trembling hands as he tried to find the words. His lungs burned with each breath, the medication offering less relief than it once had. Tomorrow, his parents would arrive to move him back to their home in another state where he would receive the specialized care his deteriorating condition required. Emma had helped him pack with the same efficient detachment she'd shown for years now, folding his clothes neatly, organizing his medications, ensuring all his necessary documents were in order. Not once had she suggested coming with him or bringing Jamie for visits. Not once had she shown a flicker of the love they'd once shared. The pen hovered over the paper as he began, "Dear Emma, I'm sorry. I was wrong." He stared at those 7 words, the inadequacy of them crushing. How could he possibly capture the magnitude of his regret, the depth of his failure as a husband and father? The letter remained unfinished as exhaustion overcame him, the pen slipping from his grasp as he dozed off on the couch. Hours later, he awoke to find the notepad missing. Emma stood at the kitchen counter, her back to him, the paper visible beside her. "Did you read it?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep and illness. The first 2 lines, she replied without turning around. "I've heard enough apologies to last a lifetime. Words are easy, Marcus. Actions are what matter." She slid the notepad back onto the coffee table, his pathetic attempt at reconciliation rejected not with anger but with something far worse, indifference. That night, as he listened to Emma read Jamie a bedtime story in the next room, Marcus finally understood that some broken things cannot be repaired, and some debts can never be repaid. The realization came years too late. Emma watched from the kitchen window as Marcus's parents helped him into their luxury SUV. His mother fussed over him, adjusting his oxygen tube and tucking a blanket around his legs, despite the mild spring weather. His father efficiently loaded the last of his belongings into the vehicle. Jamie had already said his goodbyes, brief, polite, and coached by Emma to be kind but not overly emotional. Now it was her turn. She stepped onto the porch, maintaining her distance as Marcus turned to her one last time. "You could have destroyed me, you know," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the gentle breeze. "You could have cheated, screamed, thrown things, been cruel." Emma crossed her arms, her face composed. "That was never who I am," she replied. And it was true. She had never raised her voice, never intentionally hurt him, never sought revenge through active means. She had simply stopped carrying the weight he had dumped on her shoulders all those years ago. She had stopped compensating for his selfishness, stopped making excuses for his absence, stopped pretending his indifference was anything but what it was. Her coldness wasn't cruelty. It was earned, the natural consequence of his actions. As the car pulled away from the curb, Emma felt no triumph, no vindication, no satisfaction. She felt nothing, and that nothing was its own kind of peace. Inside, Jamie was waiting, his toys spread across the living room floor in a way that had never been allowed when Marcus was home. "Is Daddy gone now?" he asked, looking up from his dinosaur figures. Emma nodded, sitting down beside him on the carpet. "Yes. Now it's just you and me, like it's always been." The phone call came 6 months after Marcus's departure. Emma was preparing dinner while Jamie colored at the kitchen table. The routine they'd settled into now comfortable and familiar. She almost didn't answer the unknown number, but some instinct made her reach for the phone. "Emma." Marcus's voice was weaker than she remembered, barely recognizable. "The treatments aren't working. The doctors say." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Emma's hand tightened on the wooden spoon she'd been using to stir the pasta sauce. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, and meant it. Despite everything, she had never wished death upon him. "Could you and Jamie come? Please. I don't want to die alone." His voice cracked on the last word, raw desperation seeping through. Emma turned down the heat on the stove, buying herself a moment to collect her thoughts. There had been a time when such a request would have sent her rushing to his side, determined to be the supportive wife he had never been as a husband. That time was long past. "You already did," she replied, her tone neither cruel nor kind, simply truthful. "You died alone the moment you decided your pregnant wife and unborn child weren't worth your effort or care." The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats. "I deserve that," he finally whispered. "But Jamie." Emma cut him off gently but firmly. Jaime has school, activities, a stable life here. I won't disrupt that for a deathbed reconciliation that would only confuse him. It wasn't vengeance driving her decision, it was protection of the life she'd carefully built from the ashes of her marriage. Emma hung up the phone, her hands steady despite the weight of the conversation. No tears came. No regrets surfaced. The time for both had long since passed, washed away by years of deliberate emotional distance. Jaime looked up from his coloring book, somehow sensing the significance of the moment despite his young age. "Was that Daddy?" he asked. Emma nodded, joining him at the table. "Yes. He's very sick." Jaime considered this information with the straightforward logic of childhood. "Is he coming home?" Emma gently smoothed his hair, a gesture of reassurance. "No, sweetheart. His home is with his parents now." She didn't mention that soon his home would be nowhere at all. That conversation would come later when it was necessary. For now, they continued with their evening, homework, dinner, bath time, stories. The ordinary rhythm of their life together uninterrupted by the shadows of the past. Later that night, after Jaime was asleep, Emma sat alone in the quiet living room. She thought about the man she had once loved, now fading away in a hospital bed hundreds of miles away. There had been a time when his suffering would have torn her apart, when his pain would have been her pain. Now she acknowledged it with the calm acceptance of someone who had already completed her grieving long ago. He had left her to suffer through the hardest moments of her life. She left him in silence during his. Not because she was cruel, but because she had finally learned what he had taught her, that some bonds, once broken, cannot and should not be repaired. 5 years later, Emma sat on a park bench watching Jaime race around the playground with his friends. At 10 years old, he was growing into a kind, thoughtful boy who bore little resemblance to the father he barely remembered. Marcus had passed away 4 years earlier. Emma had taken Jaime to the funeral, standing at the back of the church while he placed a small drawing on his father's casket. His one contribution to a relationship that had never had the chance to develop. Life had moved forward in ways Emma could never have imagined during those dark days of her pregnancy. Her career had flourished. She'd bought a small house in a good school district. She'd even begun dating again, cautiously, a gentleman who treated Jaime with genuine interest and respect. The hard lessons of her marriage had not made her bitter, they had made her wise. She had learned to recognize red flags, to establish boundaries, to expect the support she deserved. Most importantly, she had shown Jaime what strength truly looked like. Not the false strength of indifference that Marcus had displayed, but the genuine strength of endurance, of growth, of rebuilding. As she watched her son laugh with his friends, Emma recognized that her silence had taught more powerfully than screams ever could. Her quiet dignity in the face of abandonment had shown Jaime that love required action, not just words. Her refusal to carry Marcus through his illness had demonstrated that consequences naturally follow choices. And her ability to move forward had proven that endings can also be beginnings. Emma smiled as Jaime waved to her from the top of the slide, his face alight with joy. This was her legacy, not vengeance or bitterness, but a life reclaimed and rebuilt on her own terms. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share with friends who might need to hear this story. Comment below what you think Emma should have done differently, or if you believe she made the right choices in the end.